Hello and welcome to another one of these videos. My name is Paul Garrigan. You may hear a little bit of rain in the background. I hope it just adds to the ambience. It's the rainy season here in Thailand, so we get a lot of it. Anyway, what I wanted to talk about today is there a permanent solution for suffering? Is there a permanent escape from suffering? Because I think that's what most of us are actually looking for, and it was certainly what I was looking for. In fact, what I found is that most solutions seem to be only offering a kind of temporary reprieve. And these temporary reprieves, in some way, they could make things worse for me, in that they always kind of left me hungering for more and left me feeling disappointed. And one of the things that attracted me to teaching such as Buddhism and Taoism was they seemed to be offering a permanent solution. So the question is then, is that just kind of marketing hype, or is there a possible permanent solution to our suffering? I found that there is. That's been my experience, but it's not what I thought it was. It's nothing like what I expected it to be, and I'll explain more about what I mean by that as we kind of go along in this video. I thought a permanent end to suffering, or permanent solution for suffering, would mean that there'd be no more pain or no more bad things happening, and that's not what it is at all. It's actually kind of got very little to do with that. It's not about the world changing or our bodies changing. It's about us changing, and I would describe it as almost as becoming something other than all of that. It's not that stuff goes away, it's that it stops being so important and it just becomes almost a small part of our experience. And I'll explain what that means. So one of the things I found is that every time I face the sources of my suffering in life, it has always brought me to stillness. Now, one thing I want to kind of clarify, and I may not have clarified this before, when I talk about stillness, I'm not necessarily talking about the opposite of movement. I just use this word stillness to point to something that I can't really describe any better. I mean, some people will describe it as spaciousness, or will describe it as silence. But really it's none of those things, because those things are kind of like the entry point to this other thing. So maybe a better way to think of it is stillness with a capital S. And this stillness with a capital S can actually be there in movement. But anyway, what I realized was that every time I faced the thing that I didn't want to face, it would somehow morph into stillness. And for many years, the thing that I didn't want to face was that stillness itself. I mean, because I experienced that as almost like a hole in my soul. That's how I learned to describe it. That there was this hole in my soul that I was always trying to fill. And in my attempts to fill it, I was attracted to things like alcohol and all of that kind of stuff. But of course it never worked, and they, as I say, only offered temporary solutions. But more and more, and by the way, my facing things, like me facing this hole in my soul, or me facing the pain in my life, it was never a noble thing. It was never, this kind of thing, well, I'm just going to rough it out here and face the difficult stuff. That wasn't me at all. In fact, it's been more the case that it was only after failing to escape it, after trying everything I knew to escape things, and finally having to realize that I couldn't escape it, that I gave in. So I'd hate to ever give this advice. Just tell people, just lean into your pain. I feel very hypocritical almost telling people to do that, because I certainly didn't, and I only ever did it when I had no choice. But luckily, that was enough, and luckily I became much more skill that, or I started to realize there was, no choice more quickly, if that makes sense. So I would try to get away, but it didn't take me as long as it did when I was younger to realize there was no escape. And over time, more and more facing this pain, it led more and more to stillness, until that stillness started to become a more central point in my life, a more key point in my life. And what's happened in regards to suffering then, it's that, in a way that I find really difficult to explain, and that doesn't make much sense maybe rationally, is that stillness feels more me now than the rest of life. It's like that's the core of me. And it's almost like that when things are difficult, like when I'm having to, when things are hard, or when my thinking goes away, into, it tries to kind of enter negativity. It's like this is like waves on top of the ocean, but I've become more like the bottom of the ocean, where you're aware that all that's happening, but it's kind of something that's happening on the periphery, if that kind of makes sense. And that's what it means for me, for there be a permanent escape from suffering. It's not that the waves on the top stop happening, it's just that we sink deeper and deeper into this incredible stillness. And as we experience life more from that, we realize that all of our fears, all of our anxieties about life and troubles about life were the waves on the top. And our problem was that for so long we saw ourselves as just the waves on the top. In the last video I was talking about how negative thinking can be so attractive. And so maybe this does actually give us an idea of what's happening when I say this moving and becoming more stillness. So in that video I was saying that for most of us, and for a long period, most of my life, for years and years and years, my mind was going from one thought to the next thought, constantly thinking, and those thoughts tended to be negative. But what happened over time is I eventually was able to start recognize space in between those thoughts, to start recognizing stillness in between those thoughts. Now, while there was this constant thinking, it meant that my mind was being constantly informed and constantly created by the thinking. So that story in my head, it was the main component of my life. But as I became more aware of the stillness, that became a bigger contributor, until eventually it became the main contributor. Because remember, when I talk about stillness, I'm not saying stillness as a lack of movement. This is the thing that I started to notice was always here. It was always part of my perception. So it starts to be something that's always informing our perception. So going back to that original question, is it possible to permanently escape suffering? Absolutely. So long as we understand what that means. It doesn't mean that the bad stuff, the thing that we used to call the bad stuff in life, stops happening, or that we never experience pain again. It's just that becomes a less significant part of our life. And we find this resource that's always free of suffering, that's always free of fear, that's always completely there for us. And it's kind of like, I once described it to somebody. It's like walking through life being held by this mother figure who is always there to comfort you and to soothe you. And that's what I mean by that. See, what I finally understood was that for me, this suffering was not wanting life to be the way it was. To me, the suffering was this resistance to life. To me, the suffering was just wanting to escape from what was happening. And so, the end of suffering is when that stops happening. It's the stillness that makes that possible. So, I hope that was useful. And I think it is important because, I think a big problem for me and maybe a lot of people is we maybe have, how would I put it? Our idea of what's possible is very, very limited. The teacher, I think this came from Krishnamurti, the teacher, he once said that we go to the well of life with a little thimble. That, we're so, our expectations are just so low. It's no wonder we find it hard to be motivated to kind of do what we need to do to experience more stillness in our life. But when we actually understand that what's on offer, what's available is far more incredible than anything we could ever imagine, that's what really helps to motivate us. So I hope that was helpful. Leave a little like or subscribe. That'd be great. Or leave a comment. Any questions you guys ever have, I'll be glad to answer them. That really helps me to kind of think, what do you guys want to hear about? If you'd like to do some coaching with me, you'll find details below in the description. So thanks again. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again.